She blocked my tractor at sunrise, then called the cops on land she didn't even own. The morning she blocked my tractor, I knew something was off, but I never imagined just how far she'd go to take what wasn't hers. One shove of my wheel cracked her ceramic trap, and that single sound pulled me into a fight I never asked for, but sure wasn't backing down from. Stick with me, because what came next turned a quiet Montana morning into the biggest HOA showdown this lake has ever seen. If you've ever stood your ground against the wrong kind of neighbor, drop a justice in the comments and hit subscribe so you don't miss the next story where the land finally speaks for itself. Dawn on Lake Aspen Ridge always came in quietly, like it respected the land more than most people did. The morning light rolled across the water in slow waves, brushing against the pines and the old barn roof as if it were waking up an old friend. I'd lived on this Montana lake ranch long enough to know the rhythm of the place. When the trout broke the surface, when the goats stirred, when the wind shifted before sunrise. And on that particular morning, everything felt exactly right. At least for the first half mile. My tractor growled beneath me as I followed the familiar dirt path toward the west field. The air smelled of cold water and dust. One of those simple, grounding scents that reminded me why I traded a career in water infrastructure engineering for ranching, lake life, and silence. I tugged my hat down, squinting at the orange edge of the horizon, thinking through the day's work. Fence repairs, barn siding, a new irrigation valve I needed to install before the next freeze. Then the tractor rolled to a crawl, and my peaceful morning cracked clean in half. The road was blocked. Not partially blocked. Blocked. The entire path was covered with ceramic planters in every color you could imagine, some the size of whiskey barrels, others shaped like oversized teacups. Pink and yellow roses overflowed like some kind of parade float gone mad. Garden stones lined up like a child's attempt at building a fortress. 2 wrought iron patio chairs sat crookedly in the mud, one still carrying a throw pillow despite last night's wind. And right at the center of the chaos stood Bethany Reed. Her red bathrobe snapped in the light breeze like she'd stitched it out of warning flags. Sunglasses perched halfway down her nose, hands planted on her hips, posture stiff as a fence post. Bethany was the HOA president of the Maple Hollow subdivision, a place that sat on the other side of the ridge, close enough to see my shoreline, but far enough that her rules shouldn't have touched a single blade of grass on my land. But Bethany never cared for boundaries. Not physical ones. Not legal ones. Not moral ones either. She didn't move when I slowed the tractor to a stop. Didn't blink. Didn't breathe, from what I could tell. "You're not going any farther, Remy," she called out, voice sharp enough to slice through the engine noise. "The HOA has ruled that all heavy machinery must be approved before use." I stared at her, then at the mess she'd dragged onto my private access road. The planters alone belonged in a magazine spread about overpriced backyard makeovers, not in the middle of my path. "Morning to you too, Bethany," I said, cutting the engine halfway, keeping it rumbling beneath me. "This is my road." She sniffed like she smelled something unpleasant. "Not anymore. This road borders Maple Hollow Common Space, which means the HOA has a responsibility to protect the aesthetic environment. And that," she pointed at my tractor, "is not aesthetically pleasing." I let out a slow breath. Dawn light glinted off the cracked ceramic in front of my tires. I'd dealt with her nonsense before. Emails, complaints, HOA newsletters with thinly veiled jabs at unapproved agricultural activity. But this was new. Blocking an access road crossed a line even she shouldn't have dared scratch. "Bethany," I said evenly, "move your planters." "No." She tugged the robe tighter, chin lifting. "This machinery violates community standards. You will turn it around and seek approval." The irritation burned low in my chest. Not hot, not explosive, just heavy enough to make my jaw tighten. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. I didn't climb off the tractor. I simply eased my foot forward and let the machine roll an inch. Then two. Bethany's smile faltered. "Don't you dare!" she snapped. I didn't. I just kept looking her in the eye as the front tire nudged the nearest planter. The ceramic let out a thin, brittle crack, like a bone under too much pressure. Bethany gasped. "Those are antique!" I pushed the throttle slightly. The tractor roared. Ceramic shattered under the weight, petals scattering like confetti across the dirt. Bethany screamed, high, furious, indignant. And that's when I saw the lights. Blue flashes reflected off the tractor hood, off the broken shards on the ground, and off Bethany's wide sunglasses. The cruiser rolled up behind me, tires crunching softly on the gravel. I tightened my grip on the wheel. This sunrise had just turned into a storm. The cruiser rolled to a slow stop behind my tractor, the blue and red lights washing over the pine trunks and scattering across the broken ceramic at my feet. For a moment, the only sound was the soft ticking of my engine cooling in the morning air. Bethany stood frozen, her red robe trembling, her mouth tight enough to snap in half. The driver's door clicked open. Out stepped Sheriff Marcus Hale, broad-shouldered, sandy-haired, same steady eyes he'd had years ago when the two of us volunteered for search and rescue in Glacier County. He rested one hand on his belt, the other lifting in a calm morning greeting, though his gaze was already locked on the mess in front of me. "Well," Marcus said, his voice carrying that dry Montana humor, "didn't expect to start my day with this." Bethany practically lunged toward him. "Sheriff, arrest him! He rammed his tractor into my property, my antiques!" She pointed at the scattered rose petals like they were evidence of a massacre. "This is destruction of HOA materials. This is harassment. He's out of control." Marcus blinked once, then twice. He turned his head slowly toward me, eyebrows raised. I shrugged. Road was blocked. The sheriff stepped forward, boots crunching over ceramic shards, inspecting the debris, the chairs, the stones, the planters lined up like a barricade. His jaw moved once, like he was chewing on the right words. "Bethany," he said finally, "why are all these items sitting in the middle of Remy's access road?" She lifted her chin. "Because this is not his access road. It runs along Maple Hollow Common Space. Therefore, as HOA president, I have authority to restrict machinery use for safety and aesthetic purposes." "Aesthetic," Marcus repeated, his tone flat. "That tractor is a hazard," she snapped, "and completely unapproved." Marcus turned toward me again. "You got your paperwork?" I reached into the metal box bolted beside the tractor seat and pulled out the folded county map I kept on hand for exactly this kind of nonsense. The morning breeze tugged at the edges as I handed it down to him. He held the map up to the light, ran a finger along the boundary lines, looked back at me, then at Bethany. "Bethany," he said, calm, patient, the same tone he used on panicked hikers who didn't know how lost they were. "This road is fully inside Remy's parcel, all of it. HOA lines end over 200 yards that way." He pointed east, past the pines. Her face went slack, then twisted. "That map must be outdated," she insisted. "The HOA updated our jurisdiction last fall." Marcus's laugh was short, not unkind, but definitely edged. "The HOA doesn't get to redraw county parcels. That's not how land works." She looked caught between yelling and fainting. "He's driven that thing past our subdivision for weeks. It shakes the ground. It disturbs the residents. It's his land," Marcus said again, firmer. "And unless you have newer county records, you're trespassing right now." The words hit the air like dropped gravel. I watched her swallow hard. Her robe rippled in the breeze, and for a long second she didn't speak. Finally she hissed, "This isn't over. Not by a long shot." She marched past Marcus, past me, stepping over the ruins of her planters like they were beneath her notice. The wind carried her perfume, sharp, slightly chemical, as she disappeared down the trail toward her subdivision. I exhaled slowly. Marcus folded the map and handed it back to me. She wakes up choosing violence, doesn't she? Every morning, I muttered. He surveyed the wreckage one more time. I'll file the report. On her blockade, not your tractor. You're clear. He paused. But you need to stay sharp. Folks like Bethany don't lose quietly. I nodded. I already knew that. He was halfway to his cruiser when he stopped, bent down, and studied something on the ground. A faint set of footprints, small but deeper than Bethany's, leading off the road and into the edge of the woods near my barn path. Fresh. Made not long before sunrise. You expecting anyone else out here this morning? Marcus asked. No, I said, my voice tightening. He studied the woods for a long moment, the early light shifting across the tree line. Tracks head toward your barn. The cold breeze suddenly felt colder. Before I could respond, a radio call crackled through his unit, pulling him back to the cruiser. He stepped away, answering the dispatcher, but his eyes never left those prints. His instincts were working, same as mine. Something didn't sit right. When he finished the call, he climbed into the driver's seat. I'll swing back after my rounds. Just keep your eyes open, Remy. The cruiser rolled away, lights fading behind the pines. Silence settled over the road. Just dust, broken pottery, and the sound of distant lake water brushing the shore. I restarted the tractor, letting the engine rumble under me again. But before heading toward the field, I glanced once more at the woods. Fresh footprints, leading straight to my barn, and Bethany's last words echoing like a warning. This isn't over. Something told me she was right. By mid-morning, the wind had picked up over the lake, carrying that cool, metallic smell that always came before a weather shift. I tried to focus on my fencing work, tightening wire, replacing a cracked cedar post. But every snap of the pliers, every groan of old lumber, felt louder than usual, like the whole place was listening. I kept replaying those footprints Marcus pointed out. They'd been too small for him, too deep for Bethany, and too fresh for anyone who should have been near my barn at sunrise. Out here, strangers weren't common, and trespassers usually left beer cans or deer tracks behind, not perfectly placed footprints. Around noon, the goats started bleeding toward the ridge. Not frantically, just uneasy. Animals always know when something's off. I wiped the dust off my gloves and walked toward the barn, my boots sinking into the soft dirt. The path was quiet, but the air felt tight, like the ranch itself was holding its breath. When I opened the barn door, the hinges squealed louder than I remembered. The whole inside smelled wrong, like someone had been moving things around and didn't bother to leave it the way they found it. A stray bolt lay in the middle of the aisle. My ladder was leaning in the opposite direction I'd left it. And the old workbench apron, the one my dad carved initials into when I was 6, was folded open across the table. Someone had been inside. I stepped deeper, eyes adjusting to the dim. Dust floated through the slanted beams of light slicing through the boards. A nail clattered somewhere near the hay bales, but nothing moved. I was alone, at least physically. The unease settled heavier on my shoulders, and I backed out slowly, sliding the barn door shut behind me. By the time I reached the house, the afternoon sun had climbed higher, casting long shadows across the lake. I grabbed some water, stepped onto the porch, and spotted my neighbor Juan walking down the gravel road toward me. He was in his 60s, sunburned nose, ball cap pulled low, chewing on a toothpick like it was part of his jaw. "You all right over there?" he asked without preamble. Heard Bethany screaming from half a mile away. Sounded like someone ran over a whole church choir. I gave him the short version. The roadblock. The busted planters. Marcus showing up. Bethany storming off like she'd been personally wronged by gravity. Ron spat the toothpick into the dirt. "She's been riled up for weeks. Tried telling me you were a threat to the community. I told her the only dangerous thing about you is your neighborly patience. I chuckled. Appreciate that. He leaned on my porch railing, his boots creaking against the old boards. You know she's been collecting signatures for some new HOA rule? Something about regulating noise beyond the covenant line. Folks told her they didn't want trouble with you. She slammed her clipboard shut and stormed off. Funny, I said, considering she's making most of the noise. Ron gave a low grunt. Just watch yourself. Bethany always finds a way to make her mess look like someone else's fault. The wind shifted then, sharp, quick, bringing with it the faintest metallic scrape from the direction of the barn. Both of us turned our heads instinctively. My stomach tightened. You hear that? Ron whispered. I've been hearing a lot today, I muttered. He stayed only a minute longer before heading back toward his place, the gravel popping under his boots. I watched him go, but the unease didn't follow him. It stayed right there with me. By dusk, things started getting worse. The first thing I noticed were the motion lights on the side of the house. Loose, angled down toward the dirt instead of the yard. I knew I hadn't left them that way. Then my gate latch sagged, as if someone had twisted it back and forth. A folded paper fluttered by the goat shed, and when I picked it up, I felt my chest tighten. Notice of violation. HOA infraction number 2047, unauthorized livestock sounds. Livestock sounds. I read it twice, the absurdity almost funny if it weren't so invasive. My goats weren't on HOA land. My ranch wasn't under HOA jurisdiction. But the letter was taped to my fence anyway, dated that morning. I tossed it in the burn barrel. It curled in the flames, the paper blackening fast. Just when I thought the day had thrown all it could at me, the metallic scraping returned, long, slow, deliberate. It was coming from the tractor shed. I jogged across the yard, gravel spitting under my boots. The wind carried dust across the field, the pine tips rattling like dry bones overhead. As I approached, the scraping stopped. The whole shed was silent. I slowed, letting my eyes adjust. The light from the setting sun stretched across the ground in long orange stripes, reaching toward the shed like fingers. The air felt thick enough to taste. Then, in the center of the silence, I saw it. My tractor listing slightly to the right, the rubber of the back tire shredded clean through. Deep cuts ran across the sidewall, long and sharp. Someone had slashed it, and they hadn't bothered to hide it. My throat tightened as I stepped closer. The cuts weren't jagged like from a rock or accident. They were deliberate, carved with a tool, maybe even something serrated. Fresh dust still clung to the openings, meaning it had been done within the last hour. A soft rustle came from the tree line. I raised my head. The last bit of daylight filtered through the pines, but I saw nothing. No shadow, no movement. Just the woods staring back at me. "Who's there?" I called, my voice steady even though a cold spike ran through my ribs. Silence. I stepped back from the tractor, resisting the impulse to chase after whatever or whoever I thought I'd heard. My ranch wasn't a battleground. I wasn't going to turn it into one. But this wasn't random mischief. Someone was trying to send a message. They'd chosen the wrong man. As the last light slipped behind the ridge, I took a slow breath, letting the cool night settle onto the land. The lake shimmered dark and steady behind me. The goats quieted. Even the wind rested. But deep in the curve of the twilight, one truth hung heavier than the night itself. Bethany hadn't acted alone, and whoever had slashed my tires, they weren't finished. The temperature dropped fast after sundown, the kind of crisp Montana night where the cold slips through denim and sinks right into your bones. I walked back toward the house, the gravel under my boots crunching louder than usual, each sound swallowed by the dark. The lake lay still, too still, its black surface reflecting a thin slice of moon like a blade. I kept glancing toward the tree line. Nothing moved. No owl, no deer, not even a breeze strong enough to stir a branch. That silence was worse than noise. It meant someone was out there, patient, waiting. Inside, I locked the door, something I rarely did on this ranch. I poured myself a glass of cold water, leaned against the counter, and tried to put the pieces together. Bethany's roadblock, the footprints near the barn, the violation letter on my fence, and now the tractor tires. This wasn't random vandalism. This was pressure, and it was building. I checked the window over the sink. The yard lay quiet, cast in silver moonlight. The porch light flickered once. Unusual. I made a mental note to check the wiring in the morning. I had just set the glass down when my phone buzzed on the countertop. Unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Cole. There was no greeting. Just a voice distorted enough that the edges sounded blurred. Low, raspy, almost like someone whispering through a towel. Leave the ranch while you still can. My breath caught. Who is this? Static. Then the line went dead. I stood still for a long second, the cold water warming in my hand. That wasn't Bethany's voice. This sounded like a man, or someone masking their tone. Whatever this was, it wasn't just an angry HOA president anymore. I grabbed my jacket and stepped outside. The porch boards groaned softly beneath my weight. I scanned the yard again, my eyes adjusting to the dim. Then I saw it. Just for a moment. A shadow slipping behind the goat shed. Too tall to be an animal. Too quick to be Ron. Hey! I called out, my voice sharp in the quiet. Nothing answered. The goats stirred uneasily, a few hooves shifting across dry dirt. I walked toward the shed, slow, careful. The night air tasted faintly metallic, almost like rain, though the sky was clear. But before I reached the shed, headlights washed across the yard. A familiar SUV rolled to a stop in front of my house. Sheriff Marcus stepped out, his face drawn tight, jaw clenched. He nodded once. Got your message. I didn't send one, I said. He frowned. The dispatcher got a call from Bethany claiming you threatened her. Said she feared for her life. A cold weight dropped in my stomach. I haven't seen her since this morning. Marcus's eyes swept the yard. I figured as much, but I needed to check. Folks like her start filing emotional distress claims, and suddenly I've got to justify every decision I make. We walked toward the tractor shed. He crouched beside the slashed tire and traced one of the cuts with a gloved finger. This was done fast, he muttered. Tool marks look sharp. Fresh dust, too. Someone was here less than an hour ago, I said. He stood and looked toward the woods. Tracks? None that I could see. He scanned the yard again, then turned to me. You got someone helping you manage the property? Any hired hands? No, haven't brought in help since fall. He took a long breath. All right. I'll file a vandalism report, and I'll send a patrol car by tonight just in case. He paused. But Remy, this is escalating. More than I like. I know. He gave my shoulder a firm pat, then headed back to his SUV. The moment the engine faded down the road, the silence rushed back in. Thicker this time. The ranch wasn't just uneasy. It felt watched. I was halfway to the porch when a car door slammed in the distance. Not Marcus. Too far south, near the subdivision. The sound echoed once, then faded. Minutes later, the wind shifted and brought with it faint voices, one of them high-pitched, unmistakably agitated. Bethany. I shook my head. I didn't have the energy to deal with her again tonight. I checked the locks, turned off the porch light, and settled into my living room chair. A gentle creak of the old wooden frame filled the space, mingling with the distant lap of the lake. I closed my eyes, letting the quiet wrap around me. That's when the knock came. Not loud, 3 soft taps. Too soft for trouble, too late for a neighbor. I opened the door a crack. Standing there beneath the porch light was Sarah Mitchell, her brown hair pulled back, coat still covered in road dust. She held a thick folder pressed tight against her chest. "Sorry for showing up unannounced," she said, "but I think you need to see something." I stepped aside, letting her in. Sarah was one of the best land rights attorneys in the state, and a friend since college. Sharp, steady, and always 2 steps ahead of trouble. She laid the folder on the table, flipping it open. "I checked the county filings," she said. "Someone submitted a permit application under your name last week." My pulse kicked. "For what?" She slid the form toward me. "Unauthorized residential expansion into HOA jurisdiction." The forged signature looked almost like mine. Almost. "They're building a paper trail," she said quietly, "to make it look like you're the one violating boundaries." A slow burn crawled up my ribs. Not anger, clarity. Someone wanted my ranch. They wanted my land, my shoreline, maybe even the access road. Bethany's tantrum wasn't the start. It was the cover. I looked toward the dark window, the glass reflecting the faint glow of the living room lamp. Out there, someone was pulling strings. Someone who knew how permits worked. Someone who knew how to create chaos while hiding behind HOA rules. Sarah closed the folder with a soft thump. "Remy," she said, "this isn't an HOA spat. This is a setup." And then, somewhere deep in the woods, a long metallic creak echoed through the night. The barn door, opening on its own, or opened by someone else. Either way, the message was clear. This was no longer about planters, broken pottery, or slashed tires. Someone had declared war, and they were just getting started. The metallic groan from the barn rolled across the yard like a warning shot. The night air tightened around us. Sarah and I locked eyes for half a second before I grabbed a flashlight from the counter and stepped onto the porch. The boards creaked under my boots. Behind me, Sarah followed, pulling her coat tighter, the folder still tucked under her arm. The wind had shifted again, cold, sharp, carrying the faint smell of damp wood and old iron from the barn doors. My flashlight beam cut through the dark, sweeping across the yard, past the goat shed, across the gravel, and toward the familiar silhouette of the barn. One of the double doors was cracked open, just a sliver, but wide enough to see that someone had moved it recently. "Stay behind me," I murmured. "I'm not here to hide," Sarah whispered back. We got close enough to see scratch marks around the handle, fresh, bright slivers of wood. Someone had forced it open, slipped inside, and either left in a hurry or was still in there. I pushed the door wider. The old hinges moaned. Dust danced through my flashlight beam. The barn smelled wrong again, damp in places where it shouldn't be, wood fibers exposed, hay shifted. But there was no movement, no figure, no breath in the dark that didn't belong to the two of us. And then I noticed something near the back wall, something I didn't leave there. A paper, taped right to the beam. I tore it free and felt my pulse jolt. Notice of inspection. Complaint filed. Structural instability, unapproved renovation. Filed that morning. Signed by the county. Except, the signature was wrong. The county inspector's name was printed correctly, but the signature was too smooth, too clean. It looked stamped, not written. An amateur forgery, but one good enough to panic someone who didn't know better. "They're layering the narrative," Sarah said quietly, stepping closer. "First, the forged permit application. Now a fake inspection notice. They're building a legal story where you're the problem. She was right. Someone was constructing a trap, piece by piece, paper by paper, hoping I'd panic or slip up. I folded the notice and tucked it into my jacket. Whoever it is, they knew exactly where to put this to make sure I'd find it. Sarah scanned the barn one more time. And they knew exactly where your cameras don't reach. I led her back toward the house. The wind dragged cold air across the lake, rippling the surface in the dark. A goose honked far off, the only natural sound cutting through the tension. Inside, I locked the door again. Sarah spread the forged documents across my kitchen table, her flashlight angled downward like we were detectives at a crime scene. "There's a pattern," she said, pointing with a pen. "Every complaint is tied to HOA language, violation, nuisance, non-compliance. But this one," she tapped the permit form, "this was filed at the county office by someone who knows the system." "Bethany?" I asked. "Bethany isn't smart enough to forge county paperwork," Sarah said flatly. "She's loud, not strategic. Someone smarter is behind this." I leaned back in my chair, hands clasped, eyes fixed on the table. "So we're looking at two people." "Maybe more," she corrected. "One pulling strings, one acting on them." The phone on my counter buzzed. Another unknown number. Sarah shook her head. "Don't pick up." I let it ring until it stopped. She pushed a stack of papers toward me. "Remy, you need to build your case now. Documentation, timestamps, photos, everything." "I've been doing that." "Then we go further. Start tracking who comes near your property. Watch the ridge. Look for patterns. This kind of operation, they're counting on you staying passive." I rubbed my temples. "I'm not passive." "I know," she said gently. "That's why I came." She gathered her bag and folder. "I'll file a formal request in the morning to review incoming complaints at the county office. If someone forged your signature there, we'll find the entry point." I walked her to her truck. The headlights clicked on, casting long shadows across the gravel. She paused before getting in. "Be careful tonight," she said. "People who do this, they escalate fast when they think they're losing control." "I've noticed." She gave me a tight smile and drove off toward the main road. The night settled heavy around me again. I walked back inside, checking each window, each lock, each shadow, but the unease didn't leave, especially when my motion camera, one that hadn't triggered all day, blinked to life on the living room screen. A grainy image appeared. It was aimed at the far side of my property, near the old storm fence. Someone had left something at the fence line. I grabbed my coat, flashlight in hand, and headed out into the cold. The frost-bitten grass crunched under my boots as I approached the rusted wire fence. The lake wind pushed against my back, steady and cold. When my flashlight beam reached the fence post, I saw it. Another letter. Taped with the same blue HOA tape used earlier. I peeled it off. Final notice: unauthorized construction, unauthorized livestock, unauthorized machinery. Immediate compliance required. Signed again with that same too-perfect signature. But beneath the signature was a new line, one that hadn't appeared on earlier notices. "Comply or we escalate." The words felt colder than the wind. I folded the paper, tucked it into my jacket, and turned toward the house. My breath fogged in the air, drifting like smoke. Halfway back, I stopped, because the motion light at the barn, the one I'd checked earlier, flicked on again. No wind, no animals, no movement I could see, but someone was there, or had been, or wanted me to think they were. I stared into the dark until the light clicked off. Whoever was behind this was getting bolder, more careful, more confident. And that confidence meant they thought I was losing ground. But they were wrong. I wasn't losing anything. I was collecting everything. Every forged document, every threat, every trespass. This wasn't their trap. It was becoming my case, and I wasn't the one who needed to be afraid of escalation. They were. The next morning came slow and gray, the kind of Montana dawn where the clouds hang low over the treetops, and the air smells like wet earth and cold steel. I barely slept. Every creak of the house, every whisper of wind across the siding, kept tugging me half awake, listening for footsteps that never came. I stepped out onto the porch, mug in hand, steam rising from the coffee like a thin ghost. The yard sat still, quiet, almost pretending the night before hadn't happened. But something in the air felt wrong, like a storm holding itself back. The goats shuffled restlessly near the fence line. Even they sensed the shift. I walked toward the barn out of habit, boots sinking into the damp dirt. From a distance, everything looked normal. But as I got closer, a faint burnt smell, sharp and chemical, tickled the back of my throat. I froze. That smell didn't belong on a cold morning. I pushed the barn door open slowly. The hinges groaned in protest. Dust drifted through a narrow beam of pale sunlight cutting through the slats. And then I saw it. The floorboards near the workshop area were darker than the rest, wet, glistening in places, tiny pools reflecting the broken light. The sawdust around the workbench clumped together, too heavy and sticky to be dew. I crouched down, touched a fingertip to one of the darker spots, lifted it, and smelled. Not water. Accelerant. Something like kerosene or lighter fluid soaked the boards, enough of it to make my stomach turn. The workbench itself had been shoved sideways. My father's old wooden tool crate, a crate I hadn't moved in years, lay flipped open, tools scattered like someone had rifled through them. Even the hay bales stacked in the corner bore signs of disturbance. This wasn't vandalism. This was preparation. Then I saw the matchbox, sitting right in the open, abandoned on the floor, its cardboard slightly damp from the soaked boards beneath it. A little white box printed with the HOA logo Bethany used on her event flyers. Picture-perfect branding, except for the fact it was lying in the middle of an attempted fire. I swallowed hard and stood, heart pounding against my ribs. Someone tried to burn my barn down, or they wanted me to think they had. Either way, it was a message. I stepped back outside and inhaled the cold air, letting it clear the fumes from my lungs. My hand shook only once, just long enough to steady the matchbox before I slipped it into my pocket for evidence. I pulled out my phone and called Sarah. She arrived 20 minutes later, her SUV kicking up mud as she parked near the barn. Her hair was pulled into a messy ponytail, eyes sharp with focus, before she even shut the door. "You said accelerant?" she asked. "See for yourself." She stepped inside and stopped dead in her tracks. Good Lord. I watched her kneel beside the darkened boards, her fingers hovering over the soaked edges, but not touching them. She didn't need to. One look was enough. "This was deliberate," she said. "Measured, controlled. They wanted this to burn hot and fast." But it didn't. She stood, brushing dust from her knees. Because they chickened out, or something spooked them. Maybe that light you saw last night. Maybe Marcus's patrol car coming down the road. The thought sent a cold ripple down my back. She pulled out her phone. "I'm calling the fire marshal. This is attempted arson." I didn't argue. In less than 30 minutes, a state fire marshal truck rolled up, the kind with reflective striping and a heavy front grille meant for forest roads. A middle-aged man with a weathered face climbed out, his badge clipped to his jacket. His expression the no-nonsense kind you only get from 30 years of dealing with flames and the idiots who start them. He introduced himself as Marshal Robert Thorne. "Show me," he said. The three of us entered the barn. His flashlight swept slowly across the scene, pausing on the soaked boards, the overturned tool crate, the matchbox I'd placed on a clean plank. He crouched, sniffed, and nodded. Accelerant. Commercial-grade lighter fluid. Someone poured it carefully, but didn't light it. He picked up the matchbox with tweezers. And they left this? Amateurs. Unless they wanted to send a message, Sarah said. He grunted. Or frame someone. This is too obvious. Real arsonists don't leave calling cards. I exchanged a glance with Sarah. Marshal Thorne continued inspecting the area, then stood and dusted off his knees. I'll file this as a criminal attempt. We'll run the matchbox for prints. Don't get your hopes up. They probably wore gloves. Marcus needs to see this, Sarah said. He will, the marshal replied, packing up his samples. I'll make sure the sheriff's department gets everything. When he left, the barn felt hollow, like the walls themselves were shaken. I leaned against one of the posts, letting the smell of soaked wood settle. They're getting reckless. Or cornered, Sarah said. Whoever did this is running out of subtler options. She paced slowly, arms crossed, mind working. Someone was here last night. They knew your camera's blind spots. They knew the layout of your barn. They knew where to pour, where to leave the matchbox so you'd find it. You think it was Bethany? No, she said. This has someone else's fingerprints all over it. Someone who knows how to intimidate without crossing the legal line too far. Too far? I laughed under my breath. They tried to burn my barn. Try, she repeated softly. They tried and failed. That tells me one thing, they're desperate. And desperate people slip up. I looked toward the open barn doors. The wind pushed through them, fluttering loose hay across the floor like tiny tumbleweeds. Whoever it is, I said, they're watching. They're not done. Sarah nodded. Good, because neither are we. She closed her folder, the snap of the metal rings echoing through the barn. Tonight, lock everything. Tomorrow, we go to the county office. We start tracking every document, every complaint, every signature. And the matchbox? She gave a slow smile, sharp, knowing. A mistake they'll wish they never made. We stepped out of the barn together. The wind had picked up again, rattling the tin roof. The lake shimmered beyond the ridge, silver and cold, reflecting the storm clouds gathering overhead. The ranch felt different now, quieter, strained, like it was holding its breath. Sarah climbed into her SUV. Remy, be careful. Things like this? They always get worse before they break open. I nodded as she drove away, leaving me standing alone at the edge of the yard. And just as the last of the tire tracks faded into the distance, my phone buzzed again. A motion alert. From the back camera, the one facing the woods, I opened the feed. A tall figure in a hood stood halfway behind a pine tree, staring directly at the camera. Then the screen went black. They were watching, and they wanted me to know it. I stared at the blacked-out camera feed for a long moment, the cold glow of the phone screen reflecting off the kitchen window. Outside, the wind pressed against the siding, rattling the gutters like a warning whisper. Whoever that hooded figure was, they weren't hiding from me anymore. They were announcing themselves. By sunrise, the clouds had lifted just enough to spill a thin line of pale gold over the lake. The night's tension still clung to the ranch like fog. I barely slept, but the day ahead wasn't one I could face tired. Sarah and I had planned to meet at the county building, and if someone was forging documents under my name, I wasn't about to walk in there with shaky hands. The drive into town felt longer than usual. Pines lined both sides of the road, their shadows stretching across the asphalt like fingers. The lake shimmered in the rearview mirror, calm on the surface but carrying the weight of everything that had happened. Sarah was already waiting at the county office, leaning against her SUV with a folder tucked under one arm. "You look like you slept about 10 minutes, she said. 8, I replied. Camera feed cut out again. Someone was there. Her expression hardened. Then today matters even more. Inside, the county clerk recognized Sarah immediately. Folks around here knew her reputation: sharp, relentless, and allergic to bureaucratic lies. She requested log entries, complaint filings, and permit histories tied to my parcel. We waited at a wooden counter under flickering lights, the smell of old paper and dusty carpets thick in the air. After a few minutes, the clerk returned with a stack of documents held together by a rubber band. Sarah spread everything across a table: timestamps, complaint forms, digital filing logs, all the fingerprints of an organized smear campaign. But something stood out. "Look at this," she murmured, tapping a printed email attached to the forged permit. "It's tied to an external submission portal. Someone logged in using what looks like an HOA authorization code." "Bethany?" I asked. Sarah shook her head. "No, Bethany's the loud one. Whoever did this knows how to move quietly." She flipped to another page, then another, and then her eyes froze. A series of emails printed out, each one cleaner and more formal than anything Bethany had ever written. All signed by the same name: Jake Mercer, Private Compliance Consultant, Maple Hollow Subdivision. I leaned over her shoulder. "Who the hell is that?" "I've heard of him," Sarah said. "He's not HOA board. He's hired muscle with a business card. Does property compliance, community enforcement, and other things folks with money want but don't want to be tied to." "Security?" I asked. "Security for people who don't want to call it that." She pulled one last printed document from the stack, an internal HOA expense sheet. There it was, a payment: $4,500 to Mercer Compliance Services. Description: operational consultation. And the date was 3 days before Bethany blocked my road. My jaw clenched. "So this guy was brought in to deal with me?" "Or get you off the land," Sarah said. The wind outside howled across the parking lot, rattling the glass panes. I felt my pulse thumping in my palm, steady but heavy. "We need proof," I said. "Something that ties him to everything that's happened." "We might already have it." She pointed at another page. "Look at this signature. Jake's. And now look at the forged permit. See the slant of the J?" The shapes matched. I let out a slow breath. "We need Marcus." As soon as we drove back toward the ridge, Sarah called him. By the time we reached my ranch, his cruiser was parked outside, the engine still warm. He stepped out, hat tipped back, expression focused. "What have you got?" he asked. Inside the house, Sarah laid everything out on the table: the forged documents, the expense sheets, the printed emails. Marcus scanned each page with the same methodical rhythm he used at crime scenes. "Bethany couldn't pull this off," he said finally. "But this Mercer guy? He's trouble. I've dealt with his type." "What type is that?" I asked. "The kind who gets paid to skirt the line between persuasion and intimidation." I felt a cold pulse at the base of my neck. He was the one watching last night. Marcus nodded. "Probably. And he's not done." He stepped back from the table. "Let's check Bethany's place. If she's working with this guy, she'll have something on him. Maybe more forged docs. Maybe his instructions." My eyes went to Sarah. She nodded once. "Her backyard shed. The one she uses for storing HOA materials." "If the HOA materials are legitimate," Marcus said, "which I'm starting to doubt." The three of us climbed into Marcus's cruiser. The drive wasn't long. Bethany's house sat 2 plots over but felt like another world. Her subdivision was lined with manicured lawns, pastel mailboxes, and stone walkways that all felt too polished for a place that lived on the edge of Montana wilderness. Marcus parked at the curb. "Play it calm," he said. "I'll handle her." He knocked. No answer. Knocked again. Still nothing. "Check around back," he said. We walked along the side of the house, passing garden gnomes and decorative lanterns. Behind the rose trellis, half hidden from view, sat a wooden shed. New wood. Nice hinges. Lock hanging open, carelessly, like someone left in a hurry. My stomach tightened. We stepped inside. The smell of paper and lavender hit first. Then the sight. Files, binders, dozens of them stacked to the ceiling. HOA violations, resident profiles, photos, some taken at odd angles as if from hiding spots, maps of property lines, meeting minutes marked with red ink, and in the corner, a corkboard, threads connecting names, arrows, notes. My picture circled in red. Sarah's profile clipped beside it. Marcus's badge number scribbled on a sticky note. "This is a surveillance wall," Marcus said under his breath. "She's been tracking all of us." Sarah pointed to a file tucked beneath the board. "Remy, look at this." I opened it. My breath caught. Email exchanges. Between Bethany and someone labeled JM, Jake Mercer. And then a final page. A memo. Drafted, but unsent. Phase 2. Pressure escalation. Goal. Secure Western parcel access. Outcome. Removal of coal resistance. My fingers tightened around the page. "Bethany didn't act alone," Sarah whispered. "She was taking orders." Marcus tapped the board. "If Mercer's involved, someone above him might be too." I looked at the red circles, the arrows, the highlighted sections of my land. Then my eyes landed on one line scribbled at the bottom. "Awaiting approval from GP." I pointed. "Who's GP?" Sarah's face went pale. "I've seen that before. In land acquisition cases. GP could be..." A car door slammed outside. We froze. Footsteps rushed across the gravel. A voice, deep, angry, unrestrained, barked from the yard. "Get out of there!" Not Bethany, not a neighbor, and definitely not someone who wanted to talk. Marcus drew in a breath, stepped closer to us, and whispered, "That's Mercer." The shadows shifted outside the shed door. Heavy boots, faster footsteps, someone moving with purpose. Sarah grabbed my arm. Marcus whispered low, steady, "Stay behind me. Don't move." The shed door rattled, then a hand gripped the frame, and the man behind everything stepped inside. The shed door swung wider, letting in a slice of harsh daylight that cut across the dusty floor. In that strip of light stood a tall, broad-shouldered man with a shaved jawline and eyes that looked like they'd seen too much and cared too little. His boots were mud-caked, his jacket worn, and the way he scanned the room told me exactly what he was. A man used to intimidation. A man used to getting away with it. Jake Mercer. His gaze swept over Marcus, then Sarah, then landed on me like he was sizing up the weakest point in a fence. "Well," Jake drawled, "isn't this cozy? Sheriff, the lawyer, and the rancher, all snooping where they don't belong." Marcus took a half step forward. "This is a crime scene now. Back away from the door." Jake smirked. "Yeah? And what crime would that be? Checking on a shed in my client's backyard?" He turned to Sarah. "Or maybe trespassing?" His tone sharpened. "That one's real easy to prove." Sarah didn't flinch. "We have documents tying you to forged permits. And attempted intimidation," I added. Jake's jaw tightened barely. "You folks brought this on yourselves. Bethany asked for help keeping order. HOA rules have teeth for a reason." "Forging my signature isn't a rule," I said calmly. Marcus raised a hand. "Jake, step outside. You don't want this to go where it's about to go." Jake stared long and hard at him. Then he stepped backward, out the door, boots crunching on the gravel. He didn't run. He didn't shout. He just walked away. Too calm. That scared me more than if he'd lunged at us. Marcus exhaled. "He's rattled, and rattled people make mistakes." But the victory was short-lived, because the next morning, the HOA issued an emergency bulletin. My neighbor Ron banged on my door before I'd even finished my coffee. "Remy, you seen this?" he asked, waving a thick, glossy sheet of paper printed with HOA letterhead. I skimmed it. Mandatory Emergency HOA Meeting. Agenda. Address disruptive behavior, secure neighborhood safety, establish new enforcement rules. And at the bottom, highlighted, attendance required for all residents bordering Maple Hollow common space. "They're coming after you," Ron said quietly. "And probably the sheriff, too." I nodded. Then we show up. The meeting hall was a lodge-style building overlooking the lake. Stone fireplace, heavy timber beams, rows of fold-out chairs. Not a place meant for conflict. But the tension inside was thick enough to walk on. Bethany was already at the front, dressed in a crisp blue blazer, hair pulled back tight, makeup flawless. She didn't look like someone who'd just been caught forging violations or hiring a private security thug. She looked like a politician gearing up for a re-election speech. Jake was nowhere in sight, but his presence hung in the air like a threat. Residents murmured among themselves. Some glanced at me with sympathy. Others stared like I was a problem about to explode. Bethany cleared her throat, amplifying her voice with a microphone she definitely didn't need. "Thank you all for coming," she began. "As you know, this community has faced escalating danger from certain individuals who refuse to follow our regulations. This meeting is to restore order." Sarah leaned toward me. "Brace yourself," Bethany continued. "We will be introducing a new motion today. An absolute ban on heavy machinery within a half-mile of Maple Hollow's boundary lines. This includes tractors, industrial tools, and unauthorized construction equipment. Violators will face fines, removal from the vicinity, and immediate police involvement." Gasps rippled through the room. She lifted her chin, gaze fixed on me. "We cannot allow one man to endanger the neighborhood." Marcus's chair scraped loudly as he stood. "That's enough." Bethany's eyes flashed. "Sheriff, this is an HOA meeting. You are here as a guest." "And you," he said firmly, "are presenting fraudulent documents to your entire community." The room fell silent. Bethany blinked. "Excuse me?" Sarah stepped forward, holding up a stack of papers. "These are forged permits, forged violations, forged inspection notices. Every single one tied to your HOA account and your hired consultant, Jake Mercer." A heavy rumble of whispers filled the hall. "And," Marcus added, "we found a surveillance board in your shed. Detailed profiles of residents, pictures taken from concealed angles, property maps marked for acquisition." A woman in the front row gasped and covered her mouth. A man behind her stood, shaking his head as if waking from a fog. "No," Bethany sputtered. Those were drafts for community planning." "Community planning doesn't involve attempted arson," I said calmly. Her face blanched. "Arson?" Sarah laid down the matchbox, inside a sealed evidence bag, right on the front table. Bethany stared at it like it was a snake. "We have fire marshal confirmation," Sarah said. "Your consultant poured accelerant in Remy's barn. He knew the camera blind spots, and he left your custom HOA matchbox at the scene." The room erupted. Voices rose, accusations, disbelief, anger. Neighbors I'd barely spoken to were shouting at Bethany. Others demanded explanations. Someone yelled, "You put our homes at risk," while another shouted, "You lied to all of us." Bethany's composure finally cracked. She fumbled with her papers, stammering, "You don't understand. I was protecting." "Protecting who?" Sarah demanded. "Your bank account?" Marcus stepped closer, his badge glinting under the lights. "Bethany Reed, the county has issued a warrant to search your home and seize relevant HOA documents." She staggered backward. No, this is a misunderstanding." Then she ran, just bolted, pushed through the side exit, knocking over a stack of chairs and nearly hitting a man with a stroller. Her heels clacked wildly on the wooden ramp outside as she vanished down the gravel path. For a moment, no one moved. The room held its breath. Then Marcus snapped into action, pulling his radio from his belt. "Dispatch, we have a fleeing suspect from Maple Hollow Hall. All units respond." Residents spilled out of the hall like a flood, murmuring, arguing, demanding answers. The lake wind pushed through the open doors, stirring the scattered papers and echoing Bethany's frantic footsteps. Sarah exhaled, closing her folder. "We broke her." Ron appeared at my shoulder, shaking his head. "She knows what's coming." Out on the road, the distant wail of sirens grew louder. Bethany's empire, her rules, her threats, her forged authority, was collapsing. The community she'd controlled with fear for 8 long years now stood united against her. But while the meeting ended her reign, it didn't end the war. Because Jake Mercer was still out there. And so was whoever GP was. The storm had only shifted, not passed. The meeting had cracked the HOA wide open. But as I stepped out of the lodge into the cold Montana air, the wind felt different. Not lighter, sharper. The kind of wind that carries warnings if you know how to listen. Sarah stood beside me, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the tree line. "Jake didn't show," she said quietly. "That's not like a man who enjoys confrontation." Marcus nodded grimly. "He's hiding, or planning." Neighbors poured into the gravel parking lot, buzzing with anger and shock. Some came up to thank me. Others apologized for ever believing Bethany. But my mind wasn't on them. It was on the text message that lit up my phone the second I reached my truck. "The road isn't all I want. GP. No return number. No name. Just those letters." I showed it to Sarah. Her face didn't flinch, but her breath hitched ever so slightly. "GP," she whispered. "Remy, we might have a bigger problem than Bethany." Marcus leaned in. "Who is it?" "Not who," Sarah said. "What?" She pulled up a file on her phone, the same one she'd shown me the night we found the shed. "Gideon Pierce. Developer. Investor. A man who circled lake communities like a hawk waiting for a rabbit to slip. Known for hostile well takeovers disguised as community improvement initiatives. Pierce has been trying to get access to Lake Willow Creek for a decade," Sarah said. "Your property is the only piece he can't get around." I looked out at the water, silver, cold, calm. My lake, my land, my father's land before me. And suddenly, the plan became clear. "This wasn't just about me," I murmured. "They wanted the entire shoreline." Sarah nodded. "If they got you out, the rest falls like dominoes." Before we could say more, Marcus's radio crackled. "Unit 3, suspect Reed in custody. Multiple HOA documents recovered. Requesting transport." He exhaled. "Bethany's done. But Mercer and Pierce? That's another story." A low hum broke the air. Not a truck, not an ATV. A drone. It hovered above the lodge roof, dark and sleek, slicing through the wind with a slow, circling sweep. Its red sensor light blinked like an unblinking eye, watching me, studying me, marking me. Ron stepped out of the lodge and squinted upward. "Remy, that one ain't local." No, it wasn't. It was military grade. The drone dipped once, then zipped away over the treetops, disappearing into the tall pines like a ghost. "Pierce is here," Sarah whispered, "or watching." Marcus pulled out his phone. "I'll call the county tech team. That thing had encrypted routing." I shook my head. "He's not afraid of the sheriff. That drone was a message." And it was. A simple one. "You're next." That night, the ranch felt different. The lake was still as glass. The pines barely rustled. Even the gravel on my driveway seemed to crunch quieter under my boots. Silence isn't always peace. Sometimes it's pressure. I checked the motion cameras, every angle, every feed. Nothing but raccoons and a lone deer. But I couldn't shake the feeling of being observed. Somewhere in the shadows between the barn and the tree line. Somewhere behind the fence. Somewhere unseen. Around midnight, my phone buzzed again. A voicemail. No caller ID. I pressed play. Static. Breathing. Then a low voice. Flat. Cold. Measured. "You've caused more trouble than you're worth, Mr. Cole." A pause. "You should have sold." Then the call ended. Sarah and Marcus arrived at dawn. Neither had slept much, if at all. I poured coffee for all three of us in my kitchen, while the sunrise washed the lake in gold. "What's your next move?" Sarah asked. I set my mug down slowly. "Expose him." Marcus raised a brow. "Meaning?" "Pierce needs secrecy," I said. "He hides behind shell companies, HOA puppets, fake violations. But if we drag him into the light..." "He loses his leverage," Sarah finished. "Public pressure, property law, county oversight." Marcus nodded slowly. "We do this right. He collapses. But it has to be airtight." I pulled out my father's old leather folder from the cabinet. Inside were the original surveys, water rights, and shoreline access papers dated back decades. "My ranch isn't just private," I said. "It's protected by senior rights, the kind Pierce can't break." Sarah smiled, a slow, fierce smile. "Then let's end him legally." But before we could plan more, a pickup truck rolled into my driveway. Melissa, a neighbor from the HOA, stepped out, clutching a thick envelope. She approached with trembling hands. "I didn't know where else to go," she whispered. Karen, before she was arrested, she had a camera set up behind her rose trellis. It captured things. People. Meetings. She held out the envelope. Inside were printed photographs. Grainy nighttime shots from a wildlife camera. 2 men in suits, standing at Karen's mailbox, one pointing to a map, and around his neck, a lanyard. Larkland Development. Pierce's company. I felt my chest tighten. "He was here," Marcus murmured, "on your road." The sun broke through the clouds, lighting the lake in a harsh, white glare. Pierce wasn't hiding anymore. He'd stepped out of the shadows, onto my land, into my fight. And the war Bethany started. He planned to finish. But so did I. The morning air was sharp enough to sting the lungs, the kind of cold that made every sound travel farther across the lake. I stood at the edge of my porch, boots planted in the frost-dusted boards, staring out over the silver water as it mirrored the gray sky. This was the kind of quiet that meant something was ending, or just beginning. Sarah, Marcus, and I had spent the previous night putting together the final pieces. Paper trails, recorded calls, photos, witness statements, drone footage signatures, everything. And now the truth wasn't just a theory, it was a case. "Today's the day," Sarah said, joining me with a steaming mug in her hands. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were tired. "Once we file, Pierce won't be able to move a dime without hitting a federal tripwire." Marcus stepped onto the porch next, adjusting his jacket. "And the county will freeze all HOA assets until the audit's finished. This is the hammer." "But we still need the nail," I said. Sarah nodded. "The meeting. All of them together. Everything exposed at once." And so we went. 3 people carrying the weight of an entire community's future, toward the pine pavilion by the lake. As we drove down the dirt road, frost cracked under the tires of my truck. The trees leaned in, tall and solemn, like sentinels watching Judgment Day unfold. By the time we arrived, a small sea of neighbors was already gathered, 40, maybe 50 people. Some held coffee cups, some held folded arms, but all of them looked scared. They'd lived under Bethany's rule for years, and now she was gone. What came next would shape everything. Melissa stood at the front, holding a stack of HOA bylaws. When she saw us, relief softened her shoulders. "Remy, they're ready. They want answers." So we gave them answers, one piece at a time. Sarah stepped forward first, placing exhibits on the table. These documents show forged signatures used to claim Remy illegally expanded onto HOA land. These emails, she lifted another stack, show Bethany communicating with private security contractor Jake Mercer and developer Gideon Pierce to target Remy's ranch. A wave of shocked murmurs rippled through the crowd. Marcus stepped up next. "What you're about to hear isn't rumor. It's evidence. From our investigation, from county logs, from state fire records." He clicked a remote, and the projector lit up the white canvas screen. Footage of the attempted arson, the hooded figure, the accelerant, the matchbox, the gloved hands that shook just enough to fail. Neighbors gasped. Some covered their mouths. A few whispered prayers. Then Sarah displayed the final picture, the grainy photo Melissa had brought. Two men at Karen's mailbox, one wearing a Larkland Development lanyard. That quiet, thick, stunned, settled like a blanket over everyone. "That's Pierce," Ron said loudly from the back. "I'd recognize that jaw anywhere." "And the man next to him?" another neighbor asked. Sarah lifted another sheet. F. Bernard, HOA treasurer. She funneled money into private accounts tied to Pierce's land acquisitions. It hit the crowd like a punch. People who'd always stayed silent began shouting. "They raised our dues for this? My property taxes doubled last year. They tried to take his land. What makes us think we weren't next?" When the shouting died down, I stepped forward. My voice had to be calm, measured, steady, because they didn't need more chaos. They needed a path. "I didn't come here to lead anything," I said. "I bought this ranch to rebuild my life, to find some quiet on the water. But I won't let anyone take what's mine. And I won't let anyone take what's yours either." Silence again. But this time, it wasn't fear. It was listening. I lifted the leather folder, my father's documents, holding them like a flag. "These papers confirm I hold senior water and land rights for this entire stretch of the lake. No HOA has authority here. No developer can carve it up. And now that the truth is out, we can reset this place from the ground up." Then Melissa approached, hands trembling but voice strong. "I motion to dissolve the current HOA board, effective immediately." Ron jumped to his feet. "Seconded." Hands rose, one row, then the next, then nearly every person under the pavilion. The motion passed. Bethany's regime was gone. Pierce's foothold shattered. Then an older man, Frank, one of the long-timers, cleared his throat. "We need someone honest to stand between us and whatever developers come next. Someone who knows the land. Someone level-headed." Dozens of eyes turned to me. I lifted my hands, shaking my head. "I didn't come here to take charge." "But you're the only one they couldn't break," Melissa said. "That counts for something." Another voice, "We trust you, Remy." And another, "You fought for the right reasons." I felt the weight of their words settle onto my shoulders like an old wool coat, warm, heavy, familiar. "All right," I said softly. "I'll do it. But on one condition." I pointed toward the lake behind them. "No more fines for mailbox colors. No more harassment. No more power games. And if someone wants a rooster—" Ron let out a laugh. "Let it crow." This time the laughter came easy, real, healing. Later that afternoon, after the paperwork was filed, after the pavilion cleared out, after the lake grew quiet again, Ron and I drove my tractor back down the old access road. The sun was beginning to sink behind the ridge, washing everything in gold and orange. We stopped at the very spot where Bethany had blocked me with ceramic planters just days before. The dirt showed faint scars from the chaos, scrapes, broken pottery bits buried in the soil. I grabbed the crate from the tractor bed. Wildflower seeds. Figured we should plant something real this time, I said. Ron grinned. Something that'll outlast all of them. We scattered the seeds across the churned-up dirt, letting the wind carry them where it wanted. They drifted like tiny pieces of color waiting to bloom. As we finished, my phone buzzed. A text. Blocked number. The HOA isn't done. You just scratched the surface. I stared at the message long enough for the chill to settle. Then I forwarded it to Sarah. She called instantly. Encrypted routing. Someone with resources sent that. Pierce? Maybe. Or someone above him. Larkland has silent partners. So it's not over, I said quietly. No, she replied. But now you have the truth. And an entire community behind you. The lake breeze picked up, rustling the wildflower seeds across the broken ground. I stepped back, hands on my hips, watching them scatter. Because no matter what shadows were still circling, no matter who else was hiding behind shell companies or HOA puppets, they'd all forgotten one truth. You don't mess with a man's land. Not out here. Not with mountains watching. Not with a lake remembering every fight you put into it. And as the wind carried those seeds across the dirt road they once tried to take from me, I knew this wasn't an ending. It was only the beginning. But this time, I wasn't fighting alone. If you've ever stood your ground against someone who pushed too far, drop a simple justice in the comments so I know you're out there too. And if stories like this remind you why we protect what's ours, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next fight for what's right out here in the land we love.